At minus 40 degrees, exposed skin can start getting frostbite in under 5 minutes. There is no heated building at that temperature, no warm car waiting, no emergency room a short drive away. For tens of thousands of years, entire human populations lived through months of this every single winter, using nothing that came from a factory. And the methods they came up with to survive it are stranger and smarter than almost anyone expects. Start with the Ice Age hunters of the open steppe, a vast, treeless, frozen expanse stretching across much of Ice Age Europe around 15,000 years ago. The land there had almost no firewood, so they built houses out of the only large material available: mammoth bones. Archaeologists have found the remains of these structures, dozens of mammoth skulls, jaws, and leg bones stacked and arranged into circular walls, then covered with hides and packed with snow for insulation. A single one of these huts could use the bones of more than 50 mammoths. These were not temporary shelters. People lived in them through entire winters, with a fire pit at the center burning bone as fuel, because bone, soaked in animal fat, burns surprisingly well once it gets going. Burning bones sounds impossible until you remember that fat is essentially stored fuel. The same idea shows up everywhere ancient humans dealt with serious cold. When the usual fuel runs out, the body and the animals around it become the fuel. That idea becomes even more extreme once you look at diet. In the Arctic, traditional diets were almost entirely meat and fat, often eaten raw. This was not a survival compromise. It was the only way the math worked. A human body in extreme cold can burn through 4,000 to 6,000 calories a day just maintaining core temperature. And on the tundra, there are no carbohydrates available for most of the year. Fat contains more than double the calories per gram of protein or carbs, and raw fat retains nutrients that cooking destroys, including vitamins that prevent scurvy. Explorers from temperate climates, who tried to copy these diets but cooked everything thoroughly, sometimes developed protein poisoning, a real and dangerous condition, because they were eating too much lean meat and not enough fat. The insane part is not that ancient Arctic peoples ate raw blubber. It's that eating it was the only thing standing between them and starvation, regardless of how it sounds to anyone else. If your body needs that much fuel just to stay warm, what you eat stops being a lifestyle choice and becomes the entire difference between living and not. That single fact explains almost every other decision on this list. Clothing is where the real engineering shows up. Modern winter coats use 1 or 2 layers and rely on synthetic insulation. Traditional Arctic clothing used multiple layers of animal skin, each one serving a completely different purpose, and the gaps between them were the actual technology. Caribou fur has hollow hairs that trap air, and a well-made parka had an inner layer with the fur facing in against the skin, and an outer layer with the fur facing out, creating 2 separate insulating air pockets instead of 1. Sealskin, which is naturally waterproof, was used for boots and outer layers in wet conditions, because wet fur in extreme cold is a death sentence. The stitching itself mattered just as much. Seamstresses used a waterproof stitch that didn't fully puncture through both layers of hide, so the seams stayed dry. Clothing this precise could mean the difference between a hunting trip and a body that didn't come back. The lesson buried in all that stitching is simple. It was never about having one thick layer. It was about creating space, gaps of trapped air that did the actual insulating. The materials were just there to hold the air in place. Then there's the problem almost nobody thinks about: snow blindness. Sunlight reflecting off snow can be intense enough to burn the corneas, causing temporary blindness that can last for days. For people who needed to hunt and travel constantly, going blind for even a few days in the middle of winter could be fatal. The solution, used by Arctic peoples for thousands of years, was a pair of goggles carved from bone, antler, or wood, with a narrow horizontal slit cut across each eye. The slit let in just enough light to see by while blocking most of the glare. Archaeologists have found these goggles at sites going back over 2,000 years, and the basic design is functionally identical to modern snow goggles, just without the plastic. Someone, somewhere, figured out that a thin slit of vision was better than full sight in conditions bright enough to damage the eye, centuries before anyone understood what ultraviolet light actually was. Shelter itself had its own counterintuitive logic. An igloo, built correctly from blocks of compacted snow, can keep the interior temperature 30 to 40 degrees warmer than the outside air, using nothing but body heat and a small oil lamp. This works because snow is full of trapped air pockets, the same principle as the clothing, and because the entrance tunnel is built lower than the sleeping platform. Cold air sinks and pools in the tunnel, while warmer air rises and stays trapped in the dome where people sleep. Building a shelter out of the very thing that is trying to kill you, and using its own structure to keep that cold out, is the kind of solution that only comes from generations of trial and error, in conditions where getting it wrong meant not waking up. The smartest survival technology rarely fights the environment directly. It usually finds the one quirk in how that environment behaves and quietly uses it as a tool. Fire itself was treated very differently than most people imagine. In many cold climate societies, keeping a fire burning continuously, sometimes for years, was considered far more important than the ability to start a new one. Friction-based fire starting is slow, exhausting, and can fail completely in wet or extremely cold conditions when materials are damp or hands are too numb to work properly, so fire was carried. Smoldering fungus, certain types of tree bark, or slow-burning embers wrapped in protective material were transported between camps, sometimes over long distances, specifically so a group never had to start from nothing in the worst conditions. Losing the fire wasn't an inconvenience. In the depth of an Arctic winter, it could be the difference between the group surviving the week and not. And then there's sleep, which turns out to have been a survival strategy of its own. In cold climates, multiple families often slept together in a single shared space, sometimes under one large blanket or hide, with bodies arranged deliberately to share warmth. Children slept in the middle, where heat loss was lowest, while adults took the colder outer positions. This wasn't simply about comfort or closeness. Body heat from several people sharing an enclosed space could raise the temperature of that space significantly, the same principle that makes a small room warm up faster with more people in it. Sleeping alone in serious winter conditions wasn't peaceful solitude. In many places, it was something closer to a risk nobody chose to take if they didn't have to. Frostbite treatment gets into territory that sounds almost unbelievable. Several traditional Arctic and subarctic groups used urine, warmed slightly, applied to frostbitten skin, or used to soak frozen footwear. Urine is sterile when it leaves the body and contains urea, which has mild antiseptic properties, and the warmth itself helped raise the temperature of frozen tissue gradually, which matters because rapid rewarming can cause more damage than slow rewarming. It sounds extreme until you remember the alternative in a world with no antiseptic, no running water, and no first aid kit. Untreated frostbite that turns into infection. An infection in that environment was often a death sentence. Strange as it sounds, it was one of the only sterile warm liquids anyone had immediate access to. Looking at all of this together, a pattern starts to show up. None of these were random acts of desperation. Mammoth bone houses, raw fat diets, layered clothing built around trapped air, slit goggles, igloos that flip cold air downward, fires kept alive for years, and bodies arranged deliberately for shared warmth. Every one of these came from decades or centuries of people noticing what worked, failing in ways that killed the wrong people, and adjusting until the methods became reliable enough to pass down. What looks insane from the outside is usually the opposite of recklessness. It's the result of an environment with zero tolerance for guessing wrong, refined over generations until what remained was simply what worked. The cold never got any less dangerous. The humans living in it just stopped making the mistakes that didn't survive long enough to be repeated.